Hi everyone, welcome to Biology 10. Today we're going to cover our first chapter of this course, and the chapter is Biology, the Science of Life. So this is chapter 1 in the Essential Biology textbook. And so let's kind of start off with what this lecture is going to compose of. So we're going to talk about four kind of different components in this lecture. The first one is the characteristic of life. So basically, what is life? Like, how do we define life? And then once we actually define life, how do we go about classifying life? So we're going to touch upon evolution and the classification of life. And then we're going to lastly follow up with what is science to begin with. You're in a science course. What do I mean when I say science? So what is science, and how do we actually go about approaching science? So when we're really curious and want to know something, how do we actually go about approaching that scientific topic? Okay, so let's start off with characteristic of life. So life on Earth is notable for its one, diversity, and two, unity. So what do we mean by that? Well, life is really diverse, right? In this picture right here, we can see that life consists of everything from bacteria, including bacteria on you, in the environment. It includes us, it includes our pets, it includes different plants and trees and everything we interact with. It also includes like fungi, for example. It also includes many more like proteins and stuff. And we'll kind of go into all this different diversity on Earth. But at the same time, we're all unified together, meaning that we have a shared organization. So there's a hierarchy to things, which we'll kind of go into. And there's certain characteristic that defines what is a living organism. So let's talk about what are the characteristics of life. Okay, so what are the characteristics of all living things? Like, how do we go about defining if something's organized? If something's living. So the first one is that living things are organized. What do I mean by that? Well, just think about yourself, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit more in chapter 2. But like, you aren't just like one big, you know, bag of liquid, right? Like everything in your body is very organized together. So, our cells organize together to form our tissues organize together to form our organs, like all these different organs work together to form an organ system, for example, and then that whole organ system organizes together to form us, the human being, right? And so that you can kind of see this hierarchy in pretty much every living thing, that there's a certain organization to it. In order to be alive, we also have to acquire some sort of material to consume, right, to keep us alive. And so this material can come from everything from, for us, it would be us actually consuming either plant or animal matter, right? But for plants and proteins, for example, they also have to like quote unquote eat, right? So they have to kind of acquire some kind of material for them to stay alive. And so they're going to acquire energy. And this energy for them is in the source of a sun, which ultimately is also our source of energy as well. But that's the main source. But both plants, proteins, us, our dogs, we all acquire some sort of material energy to be alive and to be able to function properly. We also respond to things. So what I mean by respond, right? So we respond when we smell something really good. We notice it. We respond when something touches us, right? You've heard the whole fight and flight. So if something scares us, we respond that way as well. We either respond by jumping back, or we respond by settling down, getting ready to kind of fight whatever it is that is like jumping at us. So living things respond, and this includes plants, right? Plants also respond. So if you've ever had a plant on a windowsill, you'll notice that as it's trying to reach out and get energy from the sun, it's going to kind of slowly move toward that sun. So it does respond. Bacteria also respond. Bacteria are living, and they will also respond. So if you have a plate and you have bacteria on it, and you put the food source, like let's say on the edge, they will slowly migrate over to be able to consume that food source of theirs, right? And then living things also reproduce and develop. So we're gonna go into this all a little bit more detail in a little bit, but reproduce and develop, right? So we reproduce, like you are offspring of your mom and dad, for example. Bacteria reproduce by like just dividing. So let's kind of look at this in a little more detail. Okay, so let's look at things from smallest to biggest, right? So we're gonna start on the bottom down here, where the atom is, right? So an atom is the smallest building blocks of all substance. Everything's made of atoms, right? And an atom is small, but an atom together, when we combine it, can make a molecule. It should be this one right here, right? Our molecule. These molecules can consist of one, two, or more atoms, right? So it can be like two oxygen combined together, isn't? It can be a molecule. And so these molecules can combine together and they will form what we know as a cell, right? So here's a single cell right here. So cells can actually be many different shapes, right? That's why you see two different cells here. This is probably a neuron right here, and this can be a plant cell right here. So these cells together, as I mentioned before, can combine together and they can form what we know as a tissue. So um, like you have your cardiac tissue, you have skin tissue, we have many different types of tissue, right? So here's an example of some tissues. And then once we actually have the tissues together, we can form organs, right? So these tissues form organs. So your heart is an organ, your lungs are an organ, right? So these are different organs, and the organs, as I mentioned, can form together. So we're not even on this right here. We're still just going from cell to organism. But these organs form organ systems. So think of your cardiac system, right? Your cardiac system is not just your heart. It's going to be your heart. It's going to be all the blood involved. It's going to be the veins and the artery, right? So, but together, we consider that the cardiovascular system. So that together is now going to form all these organ systems together. Your skin is an organ system. Your cardiovascular is an organ system. Your whole immune as an organ system. All of those combined together and they form the actual organism. Right, so now at this point we're right here. So organisms here. So then all these organisms together of the same species, and by same species I mean we can actually interbreed together and form offspring, they're going to form a population. And then once we go from the population, whoops, sorry, once we have the population here, all these populations together of all these different species. So just think of in like in your city, right? You have yourself, you have your pets, you have the plants you're growing, all that in there, all these different populations together can form a community. And then the community, when it interacts with its actual environment, so this would be the atmosphere, this would be the soil, the earth, the air that we breathe, that would be a ecosystem. And we have multiple ecosystems on this earth, right? So all these ecosystems together will form the biosphere. So you can see there's a very clear way that things are organized to make our life like part so that we are participating as living creatures, right? It's very organized, and we see that with regards to how life is organized on earth, but we also see that within ourselves, like how we're formed of at a very 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 fundamental level. We're made of atoms, but those atoms, as we already went through, makes molecules and cells and stuff, right? So visually you can kind of, this is a little easier to see, maybe is visually like in this, I'll just sit with the fish, I don't mind. Okay, so visually you can see atoms, all these atoms together make molecules, all these molecules together make cells. We're multicellular, so we're not made one cell, but there are living organisms made of cells. So keep that in your back of your mind, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Like can you be a unicell and be living? So just keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we are not unicellular, we're multicellular. So multiple cells to come together and they make a multicellular organism. And as we mentioned, all of these little fishes, every single one of these individual organisms form together to form a population. And then this species of fish, along with all these other species of fish, together form this community. And then now you have the fishes, the plants, the coral, the water, and everything that forms the ecosystem. And then all of these different ecosystems then forms the biosphere. Okay, so let's look at a question. And these are the type of questions that you should expect that you might see in exams, right? So we're going to study how this group of men are interacting. They interact with each other, but they also interact with their rainforest and habitat. So at this point, what level of organization are you studying? Is it A, community? Is it B, atoms? C, biosphere? D, ecosystem? Or E, cells? I'll give you guys a few seconds. So I hope that the answer you came up with was community. And I hope that this makes sense, right? So atoms, I mean, yeah, all the atoms are interacting with, but that's not the level of organization that we're actually observing right here, right? Biosphere means we're observing the whole, all the different ecosystems together, which we're not quite observing. Ecosystem, this is a little tricky, but we're not quite observing the ecosystem here because it says that we're observing their rainforest habitat. So it's not specifically focusing on all the other um, stuff like the soil and the plants and the air, and they're not sitting there starting to study like the CO2 level, for example. And then cells, yeah, they're made of cells, and I guess technically all the cells are interacting with each other, but that's not the level of organization that we're actually studying either. So the answer for this would actually be A, community.